It is 3:30 in the afternoon in 1982. A boy walks up a concrete driveway, pulls a metal house key from his pocket, and unlocks a front door. The house is completely silent. He steps inside, drops a canvas backpack on the linoleum floor, and locks the door behind him. For the next 4 hours, nobody is going to ask him how his day was. Nobody is going to curate his afternoon or manage his emotional state. He walks into the kitchen, looks at the refrigerator, and begins to figure it out. People look back at that era and see neglect. Research from the early 2000s described this generation as one of the least parented in American history. But that assumption misses what was actually happening in that quiet house. The absence of adult supervision, when it happens early enough, accelerates specific skills like problem solving and the tolerance for ambiguity. The psychologist Donald Winnicott argued that the capacity to be alone is one of the most important signs of emotional maturity a person can develop. This generation was essentially trained in that capacity, whether they signed up for it or not. The academic literature of the time treated this like a crisis, assuming that children left alone would suffer lasting psychological damage. But a 1989 study tracking former unsupervised children into adulthood found no significant difference in academic or psychological outcomes. What the early researchers missed was what unsupervised time was actually building inside the developing brain. When a child has no adult to defer to, they develop cognitive reserve, which is the capacity to improvise and solve problems without a script. This manageable adversity acts as an inoculating stressor, providing enough challenge to stimulate growth without causing damage. Let us look at what that environment actually produced. Two Norwegian researchers analyzed cognitive ability test scores from over 730,000 male military conscripts. They found that IQ scores reached their absolute historical maximum for men born around 1975. After that specific cohort, scores began declining by about 0.2 points per year for each subsequent birth group. Because they compared brothers from the same household, they ruled out genetics, proving that something specific in the environment changed. Part of it was biological, as the phase-out of leaded gasoline contributed approximately 4 to 5 IQ points to the population. But another massive factor was how they spent their time. Marcus did not have a screen to hand him immediate answers. He read physical books. The cognitive neuroscience of sustained linear reading shows that it physically alters brain structure. Deep reading thickens the bundle of neural fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres, a connection critical for integrative reasoning. Every afternoon spent reading a paperback because there was nothing else to do was actively building that architecture. Contrast that with the modern internet, which operates on extraneous cognitive load, forcing constant micro-decisions that deplete working memory and result in shallower comprehension. This generation built their neural pathways before digital technology arrived, becoming digital immigrants who grafted digital fluency onto a mature analog brain. But being highly intelligent and left alone produces a very specific kind of internal pressure. The gap between how a gifted adolescent processes the world and how the people around him process it generates real stress. Marcus had a cassette tape on his desk that offered a solution: heavy metal. A researcher at the University of Warwick surveyed over 1,000 highly gifted students and found that rock and heavy metal were overwhelmingly their most popular genres. The intense, complex structure of the music provided an emotional catharsis that simpler music simply could not match. People assumed the music made them dangerous, but the neuroscience reveals something entirely different. Distorted guitars and harsh vocals mimic acoustic threat signals, triggering the brain's primitive alarm system. But for a fan of the genre, the prefrontal cortex overrides that alarm, transforming the threat signal into a pleasurable experience of power and control. Enjoying this music is an active, cognitively demanding process. When researchers intentionally angered participants and then played extreme music, the listeners did not get angrier. They calmed down at the exact same rate as those sitting in silence, while gaining a significant increase in feeling active and inspired. The music met their intensity and gave it a place to go. The question was never just how they survived the silence of the empty house. The deeper question is what else that specific type of isolation taught them to hide. The stoicism they developed was not a philosophical choice. It was an operating system built out of pure necessity. They grew up managing their own emotional states with no adult present to process it with. This trained them in emotional regulation, the capacity to experience something difficult and remain functional. But this adaptation has a cost. A man can get so good at regulating his feelings that he loses the vocabulary to express them to anyone else. He communicates distress the way he communicates everything else, through action or through sudden absence from routines. This is why the clinical systems fail them. A man presents with a bad back, and the protocol sends him to orthopedics, but nobody asks how he is sleeping or if he has spoken to a friend recently. The instruments designed to detect crisis rely on self-disclosure, which contradicts his entire psychological formation. The generation scoring highest on resilience metrics is simultaneously experiencing a sharp rise in despair-related mortality. They are substantially protected from the digital doom-scrolling anxiety loops of younger generations, but their analog withdrawal leaves no digital traces for intervention systems to catch. When midlife arrived, the experts predicted a massive psychological collapse. The U-bend of happiness was considered a bulletproof finding, predicting a severe drop in well-being during a person's late 40s and early 50s. But when this specific generation entered that window, the crisis largely did not happen. Economists analyzing data from millions of Americans found that the midlife hump in unhappiness had essentially disappeared. The reason is blunt. You cannot be shattered by losing illusions you never held. They lived through 8 distinct economic recessions, each hitting at a different life stage. They watched the divorce rate peak during their childhood, saw the defined benefit pension disappear just as they entered the workforce, and learned early that institutions will likely fail them. They entered adulthood already calibrated for disappointment. So when life got difficult in their 50s, they did not buy a sports car or abandon their lives. They assessed the problem, fixed what they could, and filed the rest under things they could not control. Instead of falling apart, they retreated to tangible systems. The boy who figured out the microwave at age 9 became the man who spends his weekend meticulously managing a backyard smoker. Cooking became a psychological permission structure, a way to build genuine competence where the feedback is immediate and honest. A man can spend hours making pastrami and process half his adult life without saying a single word out loud. There is even scientific evidence that the lactobacillus cultures in the fermentation projects many of these men adopt produce compounds that positively affect mood at a biological level. He is running an effective antidepressant program in a glass jar on his counter, simply because he found the process interesting. He also refuses to decorate himself like everyone else. He watched body modification move from the margins into mainstream culture, and a majority quietly stepped back. The refusal was not about pain. It was driven by the knowledge that taste changes faster than skin. He comes from an analog identity, built through repeated action rather than instant public declaration. The unmarked body is a form of privacy, allowing him to pass through different versions of himself without leaving all of them printed on the outside. But the stability of this self-contained life faces a severe threat when the external structure collapses. When a gray divorce happens, meaning a divorce after age 50, the man who can navigate complex organizational chaos often falls apart socially. He relied on his marriage for social infrastructure he did not realize she was maintaining. When that ends, he is not just alone in his house, he is alone in a way he lacks the vocabulary to fix. Divorced men in this age range face staggering risks, with suicide rates 8 times higher than divorced women. The population of older adults aging without a partner or support network is growing rapidly, and men who live alone face nearly double the mortality risk of those who live with others. If you are listening to this right now and the quiet in your house is starting to feel heavy, do not wait for a crisis. You do not need to overhaul your personality or learn therapy speak. You just need to build a piece of infrastructure. Text that guy you used to sit at a table with. Send him a picture of a project, a link to a song, or a joke that stopped being funny 20 years ago. Small, regular contact beats grand gestures every time. Make the connection frictionless enough that you actually maintain it. Do it before the winter arrives. Marcus is in his kitchen. It is early Saturday morning. The coffee is made exactly the way he likes it, and the house is perfectly still. He looks out the window at a world that is constantly accelerating, constantly demanding performance, and constantly generating noise. He does not feel the need to join it. He realizes that the empty house he walked into back in 1982 was not a void. It was a curriculum. It taught him how to sit with the problem, how to find his own answers, and how to stand outside the frantic energy of the crowd and still build something real. The silence never broke him. It simply taught him how to listen to his own mind.